going to talk a lot about carbon intensity here today, and you're going to hear it all throughout the whole day. So we wanted to start by just kind of setting the stage, just so that we're all starting at the same level playing field, right? So number one, maybe a little bit more of background and intro, and I'll let these guys introduce themselves too. But I'm the founder and CEO of Continuum. I'm a 7th generation farmer. My little kids, part of the 8th generation, they'll be here later today, and I'll share more about that. But everything that we've built here, I'm going to talk about it more later, but everything that we've built with Continuum Ag, we've built it for our own farm and built it for our own family and built these tools because we needed them ourselves. It just so happens that, hey, other farmers need this too. Other agronomists, they need this stuff too. And now folks in the biofuel space and all that. So it's just been solving our own problems, right? And building entrepreneurial tools around our own problems and taking those to scale for everyone else. So, and maybe I will let you guys give a little bit quick intro and stuff. Brad, you want to go first?
Hey everyone, Brad McDonald. Not quite the 7th generation, but 5th generation farmer. Farm in Delaware County, about an hour and a half north of here. Claim to fame is we also grow pigs and end up having the big boar at the Iowa State Fair for 3 years. So if you ever saw a Big Mac, Big Buck, or Itty Bitty, those were raised on the McDonald farmstead. So been here since 2020, COO, and happy to be here, and newly implemented regen farmer myself. So went in kicking and screaming and ended up having some pretty good success with it that we'll talk about later. But super excited for the opportunity and happy to be here.
Brad converted because he had a good agronomist on his side, I think. Mitchell forgot to say it, but we're super pumped to be here today. Yeah. My name is Carolyn King. I am the Vice President of Operations. I've been with Continuum for 3.5 years now. Brad and I were reminiscing last night that this is our 4th event with Continuum, so a lot of things have changed, but I run the department that facilitates all of the products, so if Continuum has sold you something or you are going to be a customer in the future, it's my team who does all the work on that to make sure that you guys are successful and get what you need.
So I'm Brian, Mitchell's dad, and I grew up with a Riverside address, actually, and now our farm where you are all invited to this evening is an Ainsworth address, about 10 miles southwest of here. And so as the slide that he just had up there said, we started some no-till things in 1978. Well, I was still in high school at the time, but learning some things about no-till and no-tilling corn. And I got out of college in 1985, and we went whole hog no-tilling soybeans because of weather conditions. And converted to the cover crops in 2013, and now the entire farm is cover cropped other than a couple of test strips. So we've really become more of regenerative farming since in the last 5 to 10 years, cutting our inputs back, and we'll get into that here a little bit as how that impacts our CI score.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. So these guys, I've got a couple slides for each of them to share here later, but I'll start off and kind of set the stage a little bit more of these details. I like to start with this slide because it helps to show where this space has been in carbon and kind of where we think it's really going and what we're pushing on. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard about carbon markets, right? Some of you may be in them, but pretty much all these other companies that have been pushing carbon, they're playing in the opportunity that's on the left-hand side. And sorry this is such a busy slide, but most of these companies have been playing in carbon offsets, where we're talking about creating a voluntary carbon credit sold through the voluntary markets. Those markets are mandated by the registries. So the registries set the rules, and those registries are groups like Verra, Climate Action Reserve, Gold Standard. Those guys set the rules, and that's why in order to create a carbon credit, you have to abide by rules such as additionality, right? Where you have to change practices in order to qualify that you have lowered your carbon footprint. You have to abide by permanence, this concept that in most cases, you got to be holding on to this carbon for 100 years. Leakage, there's lots of these different rules in order to play in the voluntary carbon markets. But these groups are creating a carbon credit, abiding by those rules, getting it verified, and selling it into those third-party voluntary marketplaces. And anybody can buy those credits. So say you create a carbon credit and then sell it to Microsoft. The second option is carbon insetting. And we did a large project last year where Nestle was utilizing carbon insets from internal to their supply chain. So it was still creating a carbon credit, which is 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent. So we were still creating carbon credits, but instead of selling them to the voluntary market to anybody, they were internal to the supply chain to Nestle. And this allowed us to have more flexibility in the rules and a leveler playing field that a lot of folks in this room participated in. It was the first opportunity that we actually did on our own farm. So, and I'm seeing a lot of companies look more this route. Instead of developing a carbon credit where it can be sold to anybody, developing a carbon inset to keep it internal to the supply chain. But my favorite on here is option number 3, carbon intensity. Instead of creating a carbon credit and abiding within these rules set by third-party groups, now we're talking about carbon intensity, where we're not creating a carbon credit. Rather, we are quantifying the actual, essentially the carbon footprint per bushel, or the carbon intensity per bushel. And that's important as we convert that bushel into a gallon of biofuel, like we're going to talk a lot about today. But very bullish on the concept that it's not just going to be biofuel utilizing these low carbon bushels, but it's going to be low carbon pork. You're sitting in Washington County, Iowa, number 2 pork producing county in the country. So low carbon pork, low carbon eggs, low carbon milk. Very bullish on this concept here, and then it's going to expand beyond just carbon to other outcomes, other metrics as well. But this concept is not set up by the registries, but it was really enabled by the U.S. Department of Energy. Let me buzz through a couple things. So in carbon credits, carbon offsets, right? A company emits carbon, then they look to the voluntary markets, buy a carbon credit from somebody else, and try to balance out their emissions, right? So they want to lower the amount that they are emitting, but they buy an offset from somebody else to balance themselves out. In this carbon space, a life cycle analysis and looking at your whole footprint of a product is kind of carbon 101. And especially as we talk about biofuels, we have to look at this entire supply chain where these biofuel companies are looking at their direct emissions. That's called their scope 1 carbon footprint. They're looking at their indirect emissions coming from their energy usage, and great to have those energy folks represented in the room here today as well. They're playing in that scope 2 space. But the big piece of that Continuum is really focused on is the scope 3, which is the supply chain, right? The corn or soybeans going into that biofuel, the transportation of getting that feedstock to market, and then getting the actual fuel to market after that. It's that scope 3 that's a huge part of the carbon footprint, and it's where we can really play a role. Overall, biofuels have already been doing a really good job, and I think we're going to hear from Monty here in a little bit about how good we are already doing, already leading the charge. But in these 45Z tax credits, which is really where we see the best, biggest near-term opportunity, the ethanol companies and other biofuel producers, they've still got to do a little bit better. According to the Renewable Fuels Association, the typical gallon of ethanol has a CI score of about 53. This information that we'll share today, I've talked with about 100 ethanol plants personally, and every single plant has a slightly different score, but typically in that mid-50s. In order to qualify for 45Z, they have to get below a score of 50. That's the magic number, 50. It's the magic number. And of that score of 50, the corn plays a huge, huge role. And Brad, this is where maybe I'll pass it along to you, speaking to what's enabling all this to happen.
Yeah, so I'll go into kind of what I like to say as far as the economics of everything. My heart belongs to the farm, but my head belongs to economics. So that's kind of how I approach things. And the nice thing is that they complement each other. You can't keep farming without the economics working too. So basically, the Inflation Reduction Act is why we're all here today as far as with carbon intensity. Carbon intensity really wasn't a thing until the Inflation Reduction Act monetized it. So it's passed in 2022. And we've been beating this drum now for multiple years as far as the importance that it has on the agriculture industry overall, and particularly what the farmer's going to be benefiting from it. So we don't have all the answers, we don't claim to have all the answers, but we know that the opportunity is so massive that we have to be doing this. And so I think it's just important for every farmer in the room and anyone else to at least understand what the opportunity is. So that's really the key thing here as far as what this means for the farmer. And so that's kind of the history of where it comes from. So how this works is from the federal government, it's not going to be like a direct subsidy to farmers.
Yeah.
All of the money flows through biofuels. And it's all in the form of tax credits to the tune of 2 cents per CI point reduction per gallon. And so the opportunity is truly massive here when we're looking at what a biofuel manufacturer can get to. Mitchell mentioned as far as the average score right now is 53. But they're in the money anything beyond 50 all the way to 0. So if you think of 0 as the all-important carbon neutral that everyone talks about, and like it, love it, indifferent on where your stance is for carbon emissions, that's the reality of the situation, which means that a biofuel manufacturer can earn $1 per gallon per year in tax credits. And on top of, so just put it in plain terms, think of not having to pay your taxes every year. And on top of that, whatever you've earned on top of reducing your tax liability, you can sell those tax credits on the open market, and right now they're going for about 92 cents. There's 23 billion gallons of biofuels produced every year. So when we think of it at a macro scale, we're talking the US government is basically throwing $23 billion, the potential for $23 billion every year at this sector. Now, the question is how much of it is going to be split, what's the cost to be able to do it, and all of those can't really be answered. But we recognize $23 billion every single year flowing, that is a massive opportunity, more than anything that we've ever heard about, and certainly way more than anything previous with regards to tax or carbon credits. So that's kind of the key thing with that slide. And this kind of goes into the math of it. We were talking as far as 53 being the farmer piece, or the ethanol piece, but the farmer is contributing a significant amount of that. And so when you think of the number of 50, 29 of those points is coming from the corn being fed into biodiesel. And so that's or not biodiesel, but biofuels. So if you think of it that way, the farmer has the opportunity to have the biggest impact out of any other method that these biofuel manufacturers can do just by reducing our own footprint. So how that works is if me as a farmer can reduce my own footprint of the grain that I'm producing, I am providing a direct value to the biofuel manufacturer. And together, with the money flowing through the biofuels, we would be able to capture and split that value. And we don't know exactly what that value is, but again, the opportunity is just absolutely tremendous. I don't know if...
Yeah, and I can hit on this, Brad.
Yeah,
so essentially, every single ethanol plant is starting from a different point, right? And you're going to hear about that today. And none of them really, like, we don't have all these rules yet. But we know that the opportunity is potentially big enough, like Brad was getting at. Nobody's going to be making $1 a gallon anytime soon. They would have to stack low carbon corn and have the CO2 pipelines or other methods of that direct capture or reduction and have more renewable energy. It would take a lot of work to be able to get this maxed out, but the carrot is huge. And on the farmer side, like Brad was getting at, our corn has a huge carbon footprint. The conversion from a bushel of corn to a gallon of ethanol, we use the conservative number of just 2.7 gallons per bushel, but most ethanol plants are significantly better than that. But this kind of lays out every single farm has a score. Whether you like it or not, every bushel you produce already has a score. It's coming from the Department of Energy, and that score is really what you need to understand, and that's where we've been helping farmers, and that's Carolyn where... Oh, sorry, Brad's got
well,
you.
Actually, why don't you go back to that slide real quick as far as, I think that just the conversion, just to be clear. So it's 2 cents per CI point per gallon, and using the 2.7 conversion, that would mean 5.4 cents per bushel per CI point.
Yeah.
So if you think of if the average farmer, that magic number is 29, if you are able to be lower as a farmer to reduce that score, and we'll talk about all the methods to reduce your score later, that's worth 5.4 cents per CI point in terms of value that I'm creating for the biofuel manufacturer. That's not necessarily dollars that are going to flow into the farmer's pocket, but just to understand, okay, where am I at for a CI score? That is worth, for every point that I'm lower than the average, that's worth 5.4 cents. So I like to just kind of put things into my terms. So as far as just a simple analysis, so we were talking as far as on the macro level, what does this mean for an opportunity, but what on the micro level? And so I'll just use my own farm here. I mentioned that I was not always a regen farmer, conventional all the way. I did anhydrous and vertical till plow, definitely nothing, no cover crops. That's like a curse word from where I'm from. So Delaware County, we don't like cover crops too much. But even with that, my score was a 25. So without any of the regen practices, theoretically, I was still in the money because I was below 29. Now, how much I could have seen from that, I don't know. But the key thing is that at least if that was available in 2019 for me to be able to sell my grain to the biofuel manufacturers, I could have still had a score that was worth something to the biofuel manufacturers, and hopefully we would have been able to come to an agreement where I could have got a part of that. And for me not changing any practices, that's worth 22 cents a bushel or about $44 per acre. Compare that to a carbon credit program, for example. Carbon credit program pays anywhere from $20 to $35 an acre. So, but you have to sign up for all of these things. You have to sign up, I'm going to be changing my practices. I'm going to sign up for a 10-year contract and all of these different strings that have to go along with those contracts that are only paying out $20 to $35. Whereas here, me as a conventional farmer in 2019, I was at least providing value of $44, and there could have been a split there.
Yep.
So flash forward to 2022. This is after working with Continuum, just taking things a little slow as far as in this regen space, but I guess it wasn't so slow. It was straight up, I did no-till cover crop right off the bat with the help of these guys up here. So that ended up doing a cover crop, no-till, switching from synthetics like anhydrous to hog manure, utilizing that in my crop land. Go ahead and click it one more time, Mitchell. That ended up with a negative 4.3. So I went from a 25 to a negative 4.3 like that. And it can be that fast. And because the way that the model is set up, it is looking at what is your practices per year. It's not looking at what did you do in history or what are the changes that are happening going forward. It is looking strictly at what happened that year. And so if I look at my 2022 crop, ended up with a negative 4.3, which the key thing there is it was worth $467 per acre. Now we're talking real money. And again, that's not all going to be flowing back to me as the farmer, but certainly that pie is massive, where the biofuel manufacturer and myself could have come to some type of agreement that is extremely beneficial to the farm.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing.
No, I appreciate that, Brad. And Brad was just getting on at the end. We cannot be over-promising in this space. $0 are flowing today. None of us have made a penny in selling low CI crops. And we don't know when any of this is going to start, if at all. But the point of all this being is we are all in, because where else in ag or in sustainability is there this type of an opportunity? And this type of an opportunity for collaboration. None of us are going to get a nickel without collaborating with our friends in the biofuel space. And the biofuel producers have multiple different ways that they can lower their score, but the on-farm footprint is a huge part of their today, quote-unquote, problem. But it's a big opportunity for them to lower, and that's where we've been trying to help out.
Yeah. So we've been helping farmers get their kind of initial CI scores for about a year and a half now. We really rolled it out at this event last year. And so in the last year and a half, we've scored almost 300 million bushels. Mitchell and I have a difference in rounding. He will tell you that number is almost 500 million. But there it is for you guys officially. So we just ran this at the end of last week.
Just jokingly say 500 million.
Yeah,
I actually showed this slide. We've had this going around.
Yep. So
this is what our website says.
Yeah. So almost 300 million bushels. We try to update this, once a week. So if you guys get your CI scores, we'll make sure that your number is included in this. But the key thing to note on this slide as well is that the average corn score for all of these bushels is an 11.2. Brad had mentioned his score before cover crops was a 25. The kind of standard number that we throw around most of the time is a 29.1. So either way you want to look at it, the number that, or the score that our farmers have is already significantly lower than what that average or standard score is, meaning that, you know, of these 300 million bushels, like everybody is in the money for sure, and the opportunity is really there. So we'll keep updating that. We'll be at 500 million bushels soon.
In no time.
Yeah, that's right. But the big thing for us, and you know what it's always been focused on, is soil health. Our mission here at Continuum Ag is to help 1 million farmers profit from improving their soil health. And CI, in my opinion, is finally the thing that will really make that a lot easier and more accessible for a lot of people. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's following the principles and really just doing the right things so that you can potentially earn those extra dollars, but also see all of these other benefits too. So maximize soil armor, minimize chemical and physical disturbance, maintain living roots, foster species diversity, integrate livestock. That's what it all comes back to at the end of the day. Obviously, you know, minding your context and being prepared is the biggest piece of all of that, but for us, it really does come back to those few things. If you've been around with us for a while, we do still offer our Regen Roadmap and Right Way soil sampling services, which really help people implement those well. But I know a lot of you in the room too already know what you're doing and don't need the extra advice. So it can be used just CI by itself. You can stack on these other products that we've had for quite some time to try to get to that negative 4.3 like Brad had. There's lots of opportunity. It's available to anybody in any way you want to look at it. And then this last slide for me here, just trying to show you guys, we ran some different analysis on the GREET model to try to determine what moves the needle the most, what reduces the score as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And the good news is it goes back to those principles of soil health that I just mentioned. So the things that really drive the CI score are using cover crops, using no-till, using manure, all of those things that are highlighted in the principles of soil health. So it really ties in nicely with what we've been trying to do. And like I said, I think it's finally that thing that will really help get some large-scale adoption from the soil health side.
Yeah, exactly.
So a little practical stuff here. This is where we've been on our farm. So this example, slide up because I'm blocking the podium here. A year ago, in 2023, this is an example of one farm and how we calculated the score on it. The average yield of that farm was 212 bushel the acre. The score ended up being a minus 4.1. As Carolyn mentioned, manure using manure as your nitrogen source is a big kicker in this. We do not have manure on the farm. We're not using it yet. Have not gone that route. So our typical anhydrous applied in the fall, we seed the cover crop, reduce our overall inputs, trying to use less fertilizers. So we're taking advantage of the natural biological systems. And as a result, this is the score that we had a year ago. The value of that 4.1 score is $1.92 per bushel when you use that 5.4 cents per CI point per bushel. So that's below the 29.1 default. We are 33 points. Okay, quick calculation. 33 points below that. The value of then $406 an acre. So as we moved into this year then, we did some more calculations. The GREET model has changed. And so we'll click onto that. So here's where we figured in the past on another farm, on my home farm, in the field there in the top left box, the old CI score on that farm was, again, based off the yield and the inputs and everything, was a minus 3.8. The GREET model has been updated, and this is as of the latest updates. We recalculated things to see what has changed. Where's that number now? Same yields, same inputs from a year ago, but what has changed is some of the credits for the cover cropped areas. We lost a few points there, But where we're gaining as well is, well, some of the other losses is some of the calculations, a little more detail on the inputs, primarily the fertilizer and the herbicides, pesticides. There's a little more calculation into that, which has increased our score by, as you can see there, about 4 points. Going into this year then, in the bottom one, it doesn't say 2024 on it, but the bottom there at home again, this is based off of that farm, the new model, and what our estimates are for this year's inputs and this year's estimated yield. So we've gone, again, it's about a 5-point change. The one thing that we have calculated into this now is we're not using the default for fuel consumption. So in our example, the tractor, the combine, the sprayer, and all that, I can calculate exactly and know exactly what my fuel consumption is. Those monitors collect all that data. The model is going to show that it takes a little over 7 gallons of diesel fuel per acre. We know we're well below that. We're closer to 4.5, maybe 5 max. Better emissions controls and less fuel consumption on the tractor. We dropped that score quite a bit because we're tracking that number. Doesn't necessarily work out that well in the soybeans as far as the fuel consumption, because they have a pretty low estimate anyhow. But this is based off of cover cropped fields, synthetic fertilizers for the most part, which we're trying to utilize, again, our biological system. And then the soybean score, you can see, did not change very much from the old GREET model to the new GREET model. But again, the GREET model will keep being updated. We'll look for those areas where we could take advantage of some of the opportunities. Again, calculate what you can calculate, track whatever we can, use the data that we've got on the farm that we're already collecting. So these are the scores that have led us on our farm.
Yeah, so seeing the opportunities ourselves, right, and knowing that the score is going to continue to change, but it all starts with the same data. So it's very easy to rerun the score since we have the data all organized. We're going to transition here now into Monty's talk, but to wrap this up, again, we're just seeing just the opportunity here. And there's no guarantees. We don't know when all this is going to happen, but gosh darn, like, it is a big opportunity. Just in corn ethanol alone, there's more than 5 billion bushels of corn that goes into ethanol in this country alone, about a third of the U.S. corn crop. And then you layer on soybeans. Well, we're going to hear about that today. You're also going to hear from Southwest Airlines later today and where this is going over the long haul. This stuff is, in our opinion, very much here to stay. If the tax credit gets implemented correctly, we are off to the races. But nonetheless, this is where the puck is going. We've got to be able to connect those billions of bushels of corn and soybeans to these billions of gallons of fuel that will be produced with it. Huge, again, opportunity for collaboration. These dollars that we're talking are not guaranteed, and none of it's moving today, but it's the opportunity to collaborate that is what this is all about. So with that, let's give a round of applause to our initial little group here.